certainly hope that the Portuguese example can be inspiring for others. We are facing a terrible crisis, really, where we must pay special attention to the most vulnerable populations. And, of course, migrants are among those normally in many of our host countries. And that's what Portugal's realized. We had to do something, in particular to ensure full access of migrants to healthcare, even from those who are not in what we normally call regular or legal situation in Portugal. So we did establish a new regime, regularizing the status of more than 130,000 migrants. Meaning that at least for a considerable period of time, they are sure that they have full access to social rights and social benefits. It is, well, in a way, a kind of a tradition in Portugal. Portugal has a long historic multicultural tradition and experience. We are a country of migrants as well. For many years, we've fought for the rights of the Portuguese migrants all over the world. So perhaps that helps us to understand how generous and humanitarian we have to be regarding the rights of migrants in our own country. Well, for sure, free movement will not become easier after the crisis. And in particular, I think that the challenge of cooperation for development, so addressing the root causes of migration, becomes even more important now, because all countries will be hit, also in the Mediterranean and all over Africa in particular. And so our agenda of cooperation with those countries will be in the near future particularly important. So it's not only about refugees, it's not only about legal channels of migration, it's also about a future where we have to pay more attention to cooperation for development. In the European Parliament, I was responsible for our report on financing for development, the contribution of the European Parliament for the Addis Ababa conference in the context of the Agenda 2030, where we discussed the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was very clear that financing of this side of our external agenda is very important in terms of cooperation for development. Then again, I think that Portugal has an interesting experience. You know, we have a Portuguese as the Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres. He was before the High Commissioner for Refugees. He launched the Global Compact for Migration. We have a Portuguese, António Vitorino, in the lead of the International Organization for Migration. And we have this special connection with African countries, some of them Portuguese-speaking countries. So we are particularly interested in promoting this dialogue and this cooperation between the European Union and Africa. I think this will be one of the topics of our presidency of the European Union that will begin in the first semester of 2021. There are a lot of myths about migration in a number of countries, and in particular certain political movements, populist and nationalist, they try to explore those fears about migration. It's really weird to see that some countries, as Hungary, for instance, where the number of migrants is really very low, that there is such a huge debate on migration and so many fears. I think it's easy to point to these kind of ghosts and exploit fears and the insecurity of the population. But we have to answer to this by defending our humanitarian values that are part of, a crucial part, I would say, of our European project. And that can really make a difference in the public debate. You know, yes, you mentioned that I was minister in charge of the integration of migrants in Portugal between 2005 and 2011. And at that time, Portugal reached the second place in the most important international ranking on migration, MIPEX, only behind Sweden. And that is because we've launched a number of measures paying attention to the integration of migrants, but also promoting legal channels of migration, access to the citizenship, which is also very important, and finally cooperation with the countries of origin. We have to win the public debate. That's the real issue. And we can only do that by confronting the myths with facts and by underlining our values, which must be in the front line of the debate. We've seen a very strange debate on the Chinese virus, but that was not just launched by internet or some social networks. This was stated by the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. So we have a serious problem there about fake news, really. And we can only face this kind of fake news with the facts, with the truth, with the reality. And indeed, that calls for a cooperation, it calls for responsibility of the relevant actors, meaning the political leaders, but also the international organizations and the press. Yes, we need to pay attention to this role of the press in order to give accurate information on this kind of issues, so that we can find and then fight this trend of fake news that, as you mentioned, is targeting migrants in a very severe way. Contribution of migrants for the development of the host societies became actually more visible now during the crisis, because they were essential to keep working a number of important sectors of our economies and our societies. But it was a matter of fact already before, meaning that there are a number of relevant studies with facts that shows how the migrants are really contributing for the development of our societies, for the equilibrium in our social security systems, and also the idea that there's a kind of a conflict in the labor market between the local population and migrants arriving is fundamentally misleading in most of the cases. But now it has become more visible. So it helps us in a way to show how essential the migrants are in our societies and in our economies. This is particularly true in the healthcare system, where a number of migrants had a very crucial role. I remember that Boris Johnson, when he came out of the hospital, the first thing he decided to do was to thank, of course, the medical team, but in particular to two nurses, both migrants, one of them Portuguese, actually. So the life of the Prime Minister really depended mostly on the contribution of those migrants. It's very interesting to see how this can be recognized in a country where there was so much hate speech about migrants, and in fact, that was one of the elements leading to Brexit and this idea of take back control of our borders, as if we could solve our problems better closing our borders than creating new forms of cooperation. I'm not very optimistic about the idea that we can avoid a polarized debate on migration. It has been so for some time, and I don't think that this polarization is diminishing in these more recent times. But I think that this is a crucial issue. Let me say that if you see the way the press has treated all these crises, well, with extensive coverage in all countries, but perhaps the refugees dimension, which is quite dramatic, was not sufficiently underlined. During this period in Greece, but also in many other countries, we are seeing a dramatic situation of the refugees, and this deserves really a wake-up call. As to the response for the future, the European Parliament is delivering quite clear messages in the need about the need of having a more integrated policy for migration, and this has to do also with resources. We are now debating in the European Parliament the European Commission proposal for the recovery plan and multi-financial framework, and these financial priorities, they have to be linked also with our migration policy and with our cooperation for development, in particular in the countries of origin of migration, so that we can address the root causes of migration. So I believe the European Parliament is one of the relevant voices calling for this agenda, and I hope that we can see some results of that in the near future. At least that's what we are fighting for.